I'm Ethan. I'm 34 years old, and my brother recently hacked my system and transferred $25,000 out of what he thought was my personal commission account. When I found out, my father didn't offer to help. He didn't offer to call the police. He looked me in the eye and told me that I was being greedy, that family helps family, and that I should just let it go. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just smiled, because that wasn't my money. It was Dad's secret offshore retirement fund that he'd asked me to manage because he didn't trust anyone else. Before I tell you about the moment his face turned the color of ash, you have to understand the night the floor fell out from under me. It was a Tuesday in mid-April. In the world of high-end architecture, April isn't just a month, it's a siege. I was buried under blueprints for a luxury high-rise, my home office smelling like stale espresso and burnt electricity. The only light in the room came from the cold, clinical glow of my dual monitors. It was 3:12 a.m. My eyes felt like someone had rubbed sandpaper across the corneas. I was seconds away from collapsing into bed when my phone, resting on the corner of my oak desk, began to vibrate. It wasn't a gentle buzz. It was that aggressive, rapid-fire hum that usually signals a catastrophe. I reached for it, expecting a panicked client or a server error at the firm. Instead, it was a notification from my banking app. A wire transfer had been initiated. Minus $25,000. The recipient was a name I didn't recognize, Apex Bet Global. My brain, sluggish from 18 hours of work, stalled. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. 25,000. Just like that, the air in the room felt 20 degrees colder. A spike of adrenaline, sharp and metallic, shot through my chest, instantly vaporizing my exhaustion. I lunged for my mouse, my fingers trembling as I logged into the secure portal. I hit the wrong keys twice, cursing under my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. When the dashboard finally loaded, the reality hit harder than a physical blow. The account ending in 9901, the one I called VaultX, was nearly empty. My first instinct was a professional-grade hack. I'm a meticulous man, I track every cent. I pulled up the access logs for my home server, expecting to see an IP address from a proxy in Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. I was ready to call the cybercrimes unit. I was ready for war. But as the log scrolled up, I froze. The breath died in my throat. The connection hadn't come from across the ocean. It had come from a device registered as Julian's MacBook Pro. The room went silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans. Julian. My younger brother. He'd been staying at my parents' estate for the last 2 months after his latest startup collapsed into a heap of debt and broken promises. 6 months ago, during a family dinner, he'd asked for my Wi-Fi password to check an email. His laptop had auto-connected that night, but he wasn't in my house. He was 20 miles away. I dug deeper into the metadata. Someone had used a remote desktop protocol to mirror my screen. They had bypassed my secondary security by guessing my password. A variation of the name of the golden retriever we'd owned when we were kids. It was a sentimental weakness I'd never bothered to patch. He hadn't just stolen from me, he had spied on me. He had sat in the dark, watching my digital life, waiting for the moment I was too tired to notice a notification. The rage that followed wasn't hot or loud. It was a silent, crystalline ice that started in my gut and spread to my throat. I didn't throw my coffee mug. I didn't yell. I simply picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang 5 times before a groggy, overly rehearsed voice answered. Ethan. Man, it's 3 in the morning. Is everything okay? Did you enjoy the transfer, Julian? I asked. My voice sounded strange, detached, mechanical, like I was reading a weather report. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end. I could hear him sitting up, the rustle of expensive sheets my father had paid for. I don't know what you're talking about, Ethan. Are you high? What transfer? The 25,000 to the offshore betting site, Julian. The one you sent via the remote access tool you installed on my workstation. The logs show your MacBook, and the IP address is Dad's house. Don't lie to me. You're a terrible liar. Look, Ethan, chill out, he said, his tone shifting instantly from feigned confusion to sharp defensiveness. This was his signature move, the pivot. I didn't steal it. I'm just utilizing it. I have a lead on a high-stakes play. It's a lock. I'll have the money back in your account by noon, plus $5,000 for the trouble. I'm doing you a favor, actually. You leveraged $25,000 of stolen money on a gambling site. I stood up, pacing the small square of my office. Transfer it back. Now. I can't, he whispered, the bravado slipping. It's locked in the play. 24 hours, Ethan. Just give me 24 hours. I hung up. I couldn't listen to the delusional logic of a man who had been bailed out of every disaster of his own making. My finger hovered over the keypad to dial 911. This was grand larceny. This was a felony that would end his career before it started. I was ready to burn it all down. But before I could hit the final digit, my phone lit up again. It wasn't the police. It was my father, Silas. Ethan, my father's voice was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of a man who had spent 30 years on the judicial bench. He didn't sound tired. He sounded like he was issuing a verdict. Do not call the authorities. He stole $25,000, Dad. He hacked my professional workstation. That's not a mistake, that's a crime. I am aware of what happened, Silas interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerous. Julian came to me. He is in tears. He is panicked. But you are not going to ruin your brother's life over a decimal point. You are doing well, Ethan. You are the lead architect at a top-tier firm. You have the condo, the car, the reputation. Julian has nothing. He has nothing because he gambles everything. I shouted, the calm finally cracking. That is my money, Dad. My commissions. And family helps family, Silas snapped back. If you call the police, you are dead to this family. You will never step foot in this estate again. Do you understand me? You will not be the reason a grandson of mine has a criminal record. Get in your car. Come here now. We will settle this as a family, or we won't settle it at all. I stood there in the dark, the silence of the house pressing in on me like a physical weight. I looked at the screen, at the empty balance of Vault-X. I felt a strange shift inside me, a gear turning, a lock clicking into place. Silas was a man of legacy, a man who believed the law was something he interpreted for others, but never applied to his own blood. He was protecting the thief because he assumed the victim was strong enough to take the hit. Fine, I said softly into the receiver. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I grabbed my keys and my laptop. I didn't call the cops, but it wasn't because I was afraid of being disinherited. As I walked to the garage, I remembered the one detail my father had forgotten in his rush to protect his golden boy. He had forgotten exactly which account I managed for him. He had forgotten that Vault-X wasn't my commission account. In his mind, he was commanding me to sacrifice my wealth for my brother's sins. He had no idea he was actually commanding me to forgive a debt that belonged entirely to him. I drove through the empty city, the streetlights flickering past like strobe lights. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel. To understand why I didn't just turn the car around and drive to the precinct, you have to understand the hierarchy of our family. Silas wasn't just a father, he was an institution. He spent his life bailing Julian out, DUI charges that vanished, credit card debts that were restructured, failed businesses that were quietly buried. And I was always the cushion. I was the responsible one, the boring one, the one expected to absorb the impact of Julian's wreckage so the family name remained untarnished. But tonight was different. Tonight, Silas was playing a hand he didn't realize was empty. He was standing on a pedestal of moral superiority, preaching about family sacrifice, while Julian hid behind his robes. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror as I pulled into the long, winding driveway of the estate. I looked exhausted, yes, but I practiced a smile. A sad, defeated, compliant smile. I was going to let Silas play the "family helps family" card. I was going to let him play it until there was nothing left in the deck. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the massive stone facade of the house. The lights were on in the study. The men's club of dysfunction was in session. I took a deep breath, adjusted my watch, and checked one last thing on my phone. The recording app was live. I wasn't just going into a family meeting, I was going into a deposition. And as I reached for the heavy brass knocker, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was about to lose everything. I was just the one who knew where the bodies were buried. To understand the trap I was about to set, you have to understand the secret history of Vault X. My father, Silas, spent 30 years as a judge, a man whose public life was built on the rigid pillars of the law. But private wealth is a different animal, and Silas had a predator's instinct for it. 2 years ago, he called me to a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place where the waiters don't have name tags and the booths are deep enough to swallow secrets. He sat there, swirling a 20-year-old scotch, looking at me with a pride that I now realize was purely transactional. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was the deed to a massive plot of scrubland in West Texas that he'd inherited decades ago. He'd sold it quietly to a renewable energy conglomerate. After taxes, he was sitting on $200,000 of invisible money. "Ethan," he whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the peat and tobacco, "your mother is a wonderful woman, but she has a heart for charity that our bank account cannot sustain. If she sees this, it goes to the church or a new wing for the hospital." And Julian. He didn't even have to finish the sentence. He shuddered. To Silas, Julian was a leak in the ship, a constant, draining liability. If Julian finds out, he'll beg for every cent until it's gone on some crypto paradise or a fleet of rental cars for an influencer house. I need a vault. I need you. He wanted me to open an account in my name. He wanted me to manage it, grow it, and hide it. He called it asset protection. I called it Vault X. I took the job because I wanted his approval. I wanted to be the son he could trust when the world was shaking. I opened a high-yield brokerage account under my own SSN to keep it legal on paper, but in my internal ledger, it was a ghost. For 2 years, it sat there, accumulating interest, a silent monument to my father's double life. Silas would occasionally ask for a small withdrawal for his private investments, but he never checked the statements. He just trusted the smart son to keep the lights on. He had no idea that by keeping the account in my name to hide it from Mom and Julian, he had handed me the detonator to his entire financial legacy. The heavy oak doors of the estate felt like the entrance to an interrogation room as I walked in. The air inside was thick with the scent of old money and new panic. Julian was slumped on the leather sofa in the study, his face buried in his hands, performing the role of the prodigal son with the nuance of a silent film actor. Silas was standing by the fireplace, his silhouette framed by the dying embers, looking every bit the judge delivering a sentence. He didn't look at me when I entered. He looked at the empty space where his authority used to be. "Where is the money, Julian?" I asked, my voice cutting through the performative sobbing. Julian looked up, his eyes red, half from crying, half from a 3-day bender. "I told you, Ethan. It's in Apex Bet. I just need 24 hours for the parley to clear. It was a sure thing, I swear." Silas turned then, his eyes burning with a cold, desperate fury, but it wasn't aimed at Julian. It was aimed at me. "Enough," Silas barked. Julian made a judgment call. A poor one, yes, but he was under pressure. He owes people, Ethan. Hard people. I stood my ground, my laptop bag slung over my shoulder like armor. He didn't make a judgment call, Dad. He committed a felony. He used a remote access tool to spy on my workstation. He stole $25,000 of what he thinks is my life savings. I let that lie hang in the air, thick and heavy. I watched Silas's face. He didn't flinch. He didn't care about the theft, he cared about the inconvenience. "You are doing fine, Ethan," Silas said, stepping toward me, his voice taking on that lecturing, paternal tone he used to manipulate me since I was 6. "You have your firm. You have your reputation. 25,000 is a setback for you, but it is a death sentence for your brother. Do you want to be the one who puts him in a cage? Do you want to break your mother's heart when she finds out her sons are at war?" He was weaponizing my own success against me. He was telling me that because I was responsible, I deserved to be the victim. He was telling me that Julian's weakness was a draft pick that allowed him to play by different rules. I looked at Julian, who was now watching me through his fingers, waiting to see if the mercy card would land. I felt the recording app on my watch vibrate against my skin, a silent witness to the extortion. "So that's the deal?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I just eat the loss." I let him walk away with $25,000 of my hard-earned money, and we act like it never happened. Silas nodded, his expression softening into a patronizing mask of fatherly wisdom. "It's not an eat, Ethan. It's an investment. An investment in family peace. Consider it a gift to your brother to get him out of this hole. He'll pay you back eventually." We both knew that was a lie. Julian hadn't paid back a dime in a decade. But Silas wasn't looking for a repayment plan. He was looking for a disappearance. He wanted the problem to go away so he could go back to his scotch and his silence. I looked down at the floor, feigning a moment of agonizing defeat. I let the silence stretch until Julian started to fidget. "Okay," I said finally. "If that's what you're commanding me to do, Dad. If this is the family-first policy, I'll let it go. I'll treat the 25,000 as a forgiven debt. But I want it in writing. I want an email from you, Dad, confirming that you've requested this, so there's no confusion later when Julian forgets the favor." Silas let out a massive sigh of relief, his shoulders dropping 2 inches. He walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder, a heavy, ownership-style pat. "That's my boy. That's the man I raised. I'll send it tonight. Family helps family, Ethan. Remember that." He thought he'd won. He thought he'd successfully bullied the good son into subsidizing the bad son one more time. He sat down at his desk, tapped out a quick, vague email on his iPad, the kind of tech-illiterate message he always sent, confirming that the issue from April 15th was resolved per his request and that no further action was to be taken. I watched the notification pop up on my phone. "Thanks, son. Proud of you. Let's move forward." I smiled then, a real smile that didn't reach my eyes. I had the recording. I had the email. I had the legal authorization of loss from the actual owner of the money. Silas had just signed a death warrant for his own retirement, and he was smiling back at me, thinking he'd just saved his legacy. I walked out of that house into the cool night air, feeling lighter than I had in years. I wasn't the vault keeper anymore. I was the architect of a collapse that was already in motion. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of clinical precision. While Silas was likely celebrating his diplomacy, and Julian was probably back on a betting app, I was scrubbing my life clean. I called my actual bank, the one that held my real commissions, my hard-earned architecture fees, and moved every cent to a new, private wealth management firm. I set up 3-factor authentication. I bought a hardware security key. I wiped my home server and reinstalled the OS from scratch, purging every trace of the remote access tool Julian had used to bleed the VaultX account. I was a ghost in my own machines. On Friday morning, a text came through from Julian. Hey bro, Apex play went south. Market volatility, you know. Lost the stake. But hey, Dad says we're cool. You're a hero, Maze. Talk soon. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. The stake he lost wasn't mine to worry about anymore. But then, the other shoe dropped. I was sitting in my office, staring at a render of the Texas high-rise, when my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a call from Silas. His voice wasn't the booming, authoritative baritone of the judge. It was thin. It was vibrating with a frantic, electric energy I'd never heard before. Ethan, he gasped, the sound of heavy breathing in the background. I need you to come over. Now. And bring the laptop. Bring access to the account. My heart skipped a beat, but not out of fear. This was it. The moment the deal of a lifetime finally arrived to collect its toll. What's wrong, Dad? I asked, keeping my voice as flat as a sheet of glass. I found it, Ethan. The commercial foreclosure I told you about. The developer is desperate. If I can put down a $150,000 deposit by tomorrow morning, I can flip the paper for $500,000 by Christmas. It's the one, Ethan. This is the play that fixes everything. Open the vault. I need every liquid cent we have left. I sat back in my chair, the sunlight hitting the dust motes in my office, and realized the Project X account only had about $112 in it after Julian's borrowing. I closed my eyes and whispered, I'll be right there, Dad. I grabbed a manila envelope, but I didn't bring the laptop. I brought the truth, and I knew exactly how much blood was about to hit the floor. The meeting with Elena wasn't just a consultation, it was a tactical briefing. We sat in a corner booth of a dim coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse, the kind of place where lawyers go to speak in hushed tones about things that never make it into a transcript. Elena had been my closest friend since our university days, a contract shark who could find a loophole in a stone tablet. I played the recording from my smartwatch first. The sound was grainy, but Silas's voice was unmistakable. Don't be greedy. Family helps family. You let it go. I watched her face. She didn't look shocked. She looked impressed, her eyes narrowing as she calculated the weight of every syllable. Ethan, she whispered, leaning over her latte, this is a masterpiece of self-incrimination. He's explicitly ordering you, as the custodian of the funds, to disregard a felony theft and treat the loss as a gift. But we have to be surgically precise. If he tries to sue you later for negligence or breach of fiduciary duty, he'll claim he thought he was talking about your personal money. We need a paper trail that bridges the gap between his command and the specific account he's actually bleeding. We spent the next hour crafting a response to his "proud of you" email. Every word was a trap draped in the velvet of filial piety. We didn't mention the words, your retirement fund. Instead, we used the phrase, the account ending in 9901 under my management. It was technically accurate, legally binding, and to a man as tech-illiterate as Silas, it looked like a standard confirmation. I hit send on my phone, watching the delivered icon appear like a lock clicking shut on a cage. But the digital cleanup was only half the battle. I spent the rest of that afternoon at my new bank, finalizing the Great Wall around my actual life. I moved my personal savings, my architecture commissions, and my investment portfolio into a blind trust. I didn't just change my passwords, I changed my entire digital identity. I sat in my apartment that evening, the city lights shimmering outside like a circuit board, and ran a military-grade wipe on my backup drives. I could feel Julian's digital fingerprints everywhere, lingering in the cached data, the saved cookies, the shadows of the registry. I scrubbed them all. By 9:00 p.m., I didn't exist to my brother anymore. I was a ghost in the machine, watching from the rafters while the rest of the family continued to dance on the edge of the abyss. The 3 months that followed were defined by a silence so thick it felt like a physical presence. I stopped going to the estate for the ritualistic Sunday dinners. I ignored the group chats. When my mother called, I kept the conversations to 3 minutes. Work was busy, the project in Texas was demanding, I was traveling. She sighed, her voice laced with that familiar, soft disappointment, but she didn't push. She was used to me being the stable one who occasionally drifted into the background to keep the gears turning. She had no idea that the gears were currently grinding themselves into fine metallic dust. I watched Julian through the digital periscope of social media. He was in full Phoenix mode. Posting photos from high-end lounges, tagging mentors in the venture capital space, and flaunting a new watch that probably cost more than his monthly rent. He thought he was untouchable. In his mind, he had successfully robbed his brother, been absolved by his father, and emerged with $25,000 of seed money. He didn't realize that the seed money was actually the soil of his own father's future, and he had set it on fire. I felt a strange sense of mourning as I watched his stories, a mourning for the brother I wished I had, the one who didn't view every relationship as a resource to be mined. But the mourning was quickly replaced by a cold, clinical anticipation. I knew Silas's patterns. He couldn't leave a secret fund alone for long. He was a gambler at heart, disguised in the robes of a judge, and eventually, he would come back to the vault expecting to find it full. The humidity of the city began to rise, and with it, the tension in my chest. Every time my phone buzzed, I expected it to be the explosion. Silas hadn't checked the balance of Vaultex in months. He trusted me to grow it. He liked the idea of his secret wealth expanding in the dark, a hidden safety net that allowed him to take bigger risks in his public life. He was living a life of high-stakes leverage, using the estate and his reputation as collateral for a series of increasingly aggressive land deals. He thought he had a $200,000 insurance policy sitting in my office. He didn't know his insurance policy had been spent on offshore parleys and bottle service. I spent those months practicing my confused face in the mirror, ensuring that when the moment came, the mask wouldn't slip. I was the architect, and I was just waiting for the client to realize the foundation was made of sand. The call finally came on a Tuesday, exactly 90 days after the night of the theft. I was at my desk, the sun setting behind the skyscrapers, when Silas's name flashed on the screen. He didn't lead with a greeting. He led with a command. Ethan. Tonight. 7 p.m. The estate. And bring the laptop. We're moving the whole fund. He sounded manic, his voice pitched higher than usual. I found it, son. The foreclosure on the Riverside commercial block. The owner is in a liquidity squeeze and needs $150,000 cash deposit by Friday morning to stop the auction. If we get in now, we control the deed. It's a 7-figure flip by next spring. This is the one that puts us over the top. This is the legacy. I felt a cold shiver trace the line of my spine. This wasn't just a withdrawal, this was a total liquidation. He wanted to empty the vault to chase a sure thing, doubling down on his own arrogance. That sounds like a massive opportunity, Dad, I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. I'll gather the latest statements and meet you there. I hung up and sat in the deepening shadows of my office. I didn't reach for my laptop. Instead, I reached for a manila envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the June statement for account 9901. The balance sat there in black and white, a mocking, tiny number that didn't even cover the cost of the scotch Silas was likely currently pouring. I put the envelope in my briefcase, checked the recording app on my phone one last time, and walked toward the door. As I reached for the light switch, I realized that for the last 30 years, Silas had been the one delivering the verdicts. Tonight, the law was finally coming for the judge. I pulled into the driveway at exactly 7 p.m. The estate looked regal in the twilight, the stone walls glowing with an orange warmth that felt entirely fraudulent. Silas was waiting in the study, the French doors open to the garden, a map of the Riverside commercial block spread across his desk like a battle plan. Julian was there too, leaning against the bookshelf, looking relaxed and smug. He probably thought Silas was about to announce a family investment that would net him a new car or a seat at the table. He hadn't realized that the table was about to be flipped over. "You're late," Silas said, though I wasn't. He was vibrating with greed, his eyes darting to the briefcase in my hand. "Let's get the portal open. I've already spoken to the escrow agent. We're going to wire the full amount tonight to show proof of funds." He rubbed his hands together, a gesture so transparently hungry it made my skin crawl. Julian wandered over, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Maze, let's see the magic box. Dad says we're going to be real estate moguls by Christmas." I didn't say a word. I walked to the mahogany table, but I didn't take out the laptop. I reached into the briefcase and pulled out the manila envelope. I slid it across the polished surface toward my father. "I didn't bring the computer, Dad," I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "But I brought the latest statement. I thought you should see the numbers before we initiate any wires." Silas frowned, his brow furrowing as he reached for his reading glasses. "The numbers? We know the numbers, Ethan. It should be around 220 with the interest. Just open the damn account." He pulled the sheet of paper from the envelope. Julian leaned over his shoulder, still smirking. I watched them, the judge and the thief, as their eyes hit the bottom of the page. The silence that followed was so heavy it felt like it was crushing the oxygen out of the room. Silas's hand began to shake, the paper rattling in the quiet, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds until the world ended. Silas stared at the paper as if it were written in an ancient, cursed language. His chest heaved, a ragged, uneven rhythm that sounded like a bellows gasping for air. The smugness on Julian's face didn't just fade, it curdled. He looked at the statement, then at Silas, then back at the paper, his jaw hanging open as the pepperoni pizza he'd been snacking on earlier seemed to turn to lead in his stomach. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating shroud that made the ticking of the grandfather clock sound like a hammer hitting an anvil. "Is this a joke, Ethan?" Silas's voice was a whisper, a thin, thready sound that barely carried across the desk. He looked up, his eyes wide and bloodshot behind his reading glasses. "The balance. It says $112. Where is the money? Where is the $200,000? I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood there with my hands clasped behind my back, the image of the dutiful, stoic son. The money was withdrawn, Dad. On April 15th, exactly as we discussed." Silas's brow furrowed, his mind racing through the fog of shock, trying to find a foothold. April 15th. That was the night. He trailed off, his gaze drifting slowly, inevitably, toward Julian. Julian had backed away from the desk, his hands raised in a defensive gesture as if he were trying to ward off a physical blow. "Wait," Julian stammered, his voice cracking. "April 15th. That's the night but that was Ethan's account. I thought I was taking from Ethan's personal commission fund. He's rich. He's got the firm." I leaned forward, the light from the desk lamp casting long, sharp shadows across the map of the commercial property Silas would now never own. "No, Julian. You assumed it was my account because you saw the name on the login. But I told you, Dad, I never mix my personal funds with the assets I manage. You asked me to keep the project Vault-X in my name for protection. And that's exactly what you hacked. You didn't steal from me. You stole from your father's retirement." The sound that came out of Silas wasn't a scream. It was a strangulated, high-pitched wheeze, the sound of a man who had just realized he'd spent his life building a pedestal for a thief. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard his knuckles turned the color of bone. He looked at the statement, then at the email on his iPad, the one where he told me to let it go, to treat it as a gift, to be proud of my mercy. You knew, Silas hissed, his eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying, predatory clarity. You knew it was my money that night. You let him take it. You stood in my study and watched me tell you to forgive the debt, knowing it was my own throat being cut. I tried to call the police, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a razor. I was dialing 911 when you called me. You threatened to disinherit me. You told me I was greedy and cold for wanting justice. You commanded me, as my father and as a judge, to treat that $25,000 withdrawal as family assistance. So, I did. I followed your orders to the letter. I let it go. The roar that erupted from Silas was primal. He swept his arm across the desk, sending the maps, the architectural renders, and his crystal Scotch glass flying. The glass shattered against the far wall, a glittering explosion of ice and amber liquid. I thought it was your money. He screamed, his face turning a deep, dangerous purple. You tricked me. You manipulated the situation to bankrupt your own father. I didn't manipulate anything, I replied, my voice remaining in icy contrast to his fire. I simply allowed you to be exactly who you are. You protected the thief because you thought someone else was paying the bill. You only care about the crime now because you're the victim. That's not a trick, Silas. That's a mirror. Silas lunged across the desk, reaching for my collar, but he stumbled, his age finally catching up to the fury. He collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest, his breath coming in jagged, wet gasps. Julian was already at the door, his eyes darting around like a trapped animal, looking for a way out before the judge turned into the executioner. The deal of a lifetime was dead. The vault was empty. And for the first time in 30 years, Silas was realizing that, family helps family, was a very expensive lie when you're the only one with something left to lose. The violence that followed wasn't cinematic, it was pathetic. Silas didn't chase Julian with a weapon, he chased him with a broken heart turned into a weapon of spite. He rose from the chair, swaying like a tall tree in a storm, and pointed a trembling finger at the son he had spent a lifetime enabling. You useless, parasitic worm. Silas bellowed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings of the study. That was my pipeline money. That was my freedom. You threw it into a digital gutter. Julian didn't apologize. He didn't fall to his knees. His survival instinct, honed by a decade of avoiding consequences, took over. You told me to take it. Julian shrieked back, backing into the hallway. You told Ethan it was a contribution. I thought I was doing us a favor by doubling it. How was I supposed to know you were hiding money in Ethan's name? You're a liar too, Dad. You're just a better one. The word liar seemed to hit Silas harder than the financial loss. He lunged out of the study, grabbing Julian by the front of his designer t-shirt, and the two of them spilled into the grand foyer. They wrestled clumsily, knocking over a Ming-style vase that shattered on the marble floor, another piece of the legacy turned to shards. I stood in the doorway of the study, watching them. I didn't intervene. I didn't call out. I felt like a spectator at the end of a long, grueling play, watching the actors tear the set down around them. Give it back. Silas was screaming, shaking Julian with a strength born of pure desperation. Fix it. Call the site. Get the money back. It's gone, Dad. Crypto crashed. It's zero. There is no money. Julian shoved Silas back, and the old man stumbled, hitting the wall and sliding down until he was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the ruins of his house. I walked slowly into the foyer, my briefcase in hand. I looked down at the two of them. Silas was weeping now, the ugly, gasping sobs of a man who had lost his pride, his money, and his favorite son in a single hour. Julian was standing by the front door, his chest heaving, looking at the father he had just broken. He looked at me, a flicker of the old arrogance trying to resurface. You did this, Ethan. You could have stopped me. You could have told him that night. I tried, I said, looking him dead in the eye. But both of you were too busy telling me to shut up and take it. You wanted a world where I was the only one who had to be responsible. Well, welcome to the world you built. It's a very lonely place. Silas looked up at me, his eyes wet and pleading. Ethan, son, you have savings. I know you do. You're a senior partner now. You can bridge the gap for the Riverside deal. I'll pay you back. I'll give you a double share. Just, don't let me lose the deposit. Don't let me lose my name. I looked at the man who had threatened to disown me for wanting to report a crime. I thought about the 30 years I'd spent trying to earn a good job from a man who viewed my stability as a resource to be exploited. No, Dad, I said, my voice soft but final. I'm not a bank. And I'm certainly not your insurance policy. You told me to let it go. So, I'm letting it all go. The money, the deal, and you. I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, Silas let out a roar of ungrateful brat, followed by a string of curses that would have made a sailor blush. But as I stepped out onto the porch, I heard a different sound. It was the sound of Julian's car engine turning over, the tires screaming as he peeled out of the driveway, fleeing the wreckage before the debt collectors could find his name. I stood on the steps, breathing in the cool night air, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the weight of the family name on my shoulders. I felt light. I felt free. I got into my car and started the engine. I checked my watch. The recording was saved to the cloud, a digital insurance policy that ensured Silas could never sue me for the loss. I drove down the long, winding driveway, the headlights cutting through the darkness. In the rearview mirror, I could see the lights of the estate flickering. It looked like a palace from a distance, but I knew the truth. The foundation was gone, the vault was empty, and the judge was sitting in the dark, waiting for a tomorrow that was never going to come. I drove toward the city, the skyline glowing like a promise. I thought about the $25,000. To Silas, it was a tragedy. To Julian, it was a mistake. To me, it was the best money I had ever spent. It was the price of my sovereignty. But as I merged onto the highway, my phone buzzed in the center console. I expected a frantic text from Silas or a desperate plea from Julian. Instead, it was a notification from my home security system back at my condo. A motion sensor had been triggered in my private office, the one room where I kept my physical archives, the original deeds, and the backup hardware keys for my new accounts. My heart hammered. No one had that code except me. I pulled over to the shoulder of the highway, my hands shaking as I opened the live video feed on my phone. The screen flickered to life, showing the high-definition infrared view of my office. The room was empty, the shadows long and still. But then, I saw it. The bottom drawer of my oak desk, the one that required a physical key, was standing wide open. And resting on the floor, right in the center of the frame, was a single, crumpled piece of paper I didn't recognize. I zoomed in, the pixels blurring and then snapping into focus. It was a handwritten note, the ink jagged and rushed. I felt a cold, familiar dread wash over me as I realized that while I was busy destroying Silas's life at the estate, someone else had been inside my home. And they hadn't come for the money. I read the 3 words on the note and felt the air leave my lungs. Everything I thought I had won, every boundary I had built, every account I had protected, suddenly felt like a house of cards. I stared at the screen, the blue light of the phone reflecting in my eyes, as I realized the game wasn't over. It was just moving to a much darker room. The silence of my new apartment was different from the heavy, suffocating silence of the estate. It wasn't the silence of secrets or the waiting game of a hunter, it was the silence of peace. For 14 months, I had lived in this quiet. 14 months of no contact. 14 months of blocking unknown numbers and filtering emails from family directly into the trash. I had spent 30 years breathing air tainted by Julian's chaos and Silas's arrogance, and for the first time, my lungs felt clear. I was standing on my balcony, the morning sun glinting off the steel and glass of the skyline. In my hand was a cup of espresso, made by a machine that cost more than my first car, a small, tangible trophy of my independence. Life was stable. It was boring. It was perfect. I had been promoted to senior analyst, my salary had nearly doubled, and I was finally with someone, Sarah, who understood that "no" was a complete sentence. I thought the story was over. I thought I had closed the book on the judge and the thief. But the universe has a way of balancing the scales, and you can't have this much light without someone else paying for the shadows. The buzzer to my building rang. I checked the video intercom, and my heart didn't even spike. That old cortisol surge was gone. On the screen was a woman wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized glasses, looking like a caricature of someone trying to be incognito. It was Aunt Karen. Silas's sister. The family's official historian and unofficial stirring spoon. I debated letting her stand on the sidewalk. I really did. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and a part of me, the part that had smiled when I drove away that night, wanted to see the epilogue. I wanted to know the exact weight of the wreckage I had left behind. "Come up," I said into the speaker. 5 minutes later, Karen was sitting on my white leather sofa, clutching her purse like it contained the crown jewels. She looked around my living room with a mixture of awe and sharp, jagged judgment. "You've done well for yourself, Ethan," she said, her voice tight enough to snap. "Very well. Considering." "Considering what, Karen?" I asked, sitting opposite her. I didn't offer her coffee. I didn't offer her water. I wanted her to stay exactly as long as it took to deliver her payload. "Considering you abandoned your parents in their darkest hour," she snapped. There it was. The guilt trip, arriving right on schedule like a commuter train. "It's catastrophic, Ethan. Your father lost the house. The estate. Everything." I took a slow sip of my espresso, the bitterness grounded me. "He didn't lose it, Karen. He gambled it. There's a difference." She let out a long, theatrical sigh. "After the incident with the money you let Julian take, your father spiraled. He was obsessed with that Riverside deal. He thought it was the only way to replace the vault funds. He took out a hard money loan, leveraged the house at a predatory rate. But the property had a lien he didn't see. The deal stalled. The lenders came calling, and he had zero liquidity. Because the secret fund was gone." She looked at me, her eyes piercing, waiting for the crack in my armor. She knew about the fund now. Silas must have screamed the truth to anyone who would listen. "So, where are they?" I asked. "Your mother is in a studio apartment near the church. She had to resign from the garden club board, Ethan. The humiliation, she can't even show her face." "And Silas?" "He's in a motel on the edge of town. He's driving for a ride-share app at 70 years old. He says he's consulting, but we all know. He's driving strangers around at 2 a.m. to pay for a room that smells like cigarettes." I looked out at the skyline. A year ago, Silas was bragging about a boat. He was sitting on $200,000 that could have kept him in silk for a decade. But he chose ego. He chose to protect a thief. And now, the judge was a chauffeur. The irony was almost too heavy to breathe. Karen leaned in, her voice dropping to a plea. "Ethan, you have so much. One check. Just one check from you could get your mother a condo. It could get Silas off the road. Family helps family, Ethan. Isn't that what we were taught?" I looked at my aunt, and for a moment, I saw the ghost of Silas in her eyes, the same weaponized guilt, the same demand that I set myself on fire to keep them warm. I was taught that enabling is love, Karen. I was taught that if Julian falls, I have to be the floor. Well, I'm not the floor anymore. I'm the ceiling. And if I write that check today, Silas will find another sure thing tomorrow. The cycle ends with me. Karen stood up, her face flushing a deep, angry red. You're ice cold, Ethan. Your father was right. You care more about your bank balance than your own blood. No, I said, walking her to the door. I care about peace. And I paid $25,000 for mine. I'd say I got a bargain. I watched the elevator doors close on her judgmental face, and I went back to my balcony. I didn't feel guilty. I felt vindicated. But as I sat there, I remembered the one loose end. One tiny, nagging detail that only I knew. I went to my desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. I pulled out a file. Inside was a cashier's check I had drawn up 6 months ago. See, when Silas set up the secret fund, he promised me 5% of the interest as a management fee. I had managed that money aggressively before Julian touched the liquid cash. I had swept the profits into a separate sub-account every quarter, standard accounting practice. Julian hadn't found it because he was lazy. It wasn't a fortune, about $10,000. Technically, it was Silas's money. Or it was my fee. It was a gray area, a lingering tether to a man I never wanted to see again. I looked at the check. I didn't want a single cent of that cursed money contributing to my new life. I didn't want my success to be built on even $1 of Silas's secrets. I picked up a pen and an envelope. I didn't make it out to Silas. I didn't make it out to my mother. I made it out to a foundation for financial literacy and recovery. I walked down to the lobby and dropped it in the mailbox. Clack. The sound was final. That was the last of it. Every debt, physical and emotional, was settled. I went back upstairs and made another espresso. My phone buzzed. A text from Sarah, dinner at 7. I'm making that lasagna you like. I typed back, perfect. I'm bringing the wine. They say you can't choose your family. That is the biggest lie ever told. You can't choose your DNA, sure. You can't choose whose blood is spiraled into yours. But family. The people you let into your inner circle, the people you sacrifice for, the people who get to call you at 3 a.m., you absolutely choose them. And sometimes, the most honorable thing you can do is to unchoose the ones who only see you as a vault to be emptied. I am 37 years old now. It's been 3 years since I walked out of that study. Silas is still driving. My mother eventually moved into a senior community. She's happier now, though she still blames me, just a little bit, for not saving them. It's the programming. I send her flowers on her birthday, but I don't give her my address. And Julian? He got arrested in Georgia for check fraud last month. He called me collect. I sat and watched the phone ring for a full minute. Inmate from Georgia County Jail. Do you accept the charges? I pressed decline. People ask me if I regret smiling that night. They ask if I regret the trap. I think about it every time I look at my bank statement or wake up without a knot of anxiety in my chest. If I hadn't done it, Silas would have drained me dry to cover his own lies. He would have dragged me down with the ship. By letting him think he was spending my money, I revealed his true character. I let him show me exactly who he was when he thought it cost him nothing. Greed isn't having savings. Greed isn't wanting justice. Greed is feeling entitled to someone else's life because you're too lazy or too arrogant to build your own. I lost a father, and I lost a brother. But I gained myself. And in the end, that was the only investment that ever really mattered. Stay safe, stay smart, and remember, no one has the right to use your heart as a credit card. Protect your peace. It's the only thing you truly own.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe Family Files for more.